Welcome to the Stochastic MLB Strategy Show. I'm your host, Neil Orfield. I'm here with Adam Ship My Money Scherer. You can find me on Twitter at PlayerQDFS. You can find him on Twitter at ShipMyMoneyDFS. This show is sponsored by SoRare MLB, new product out there, and it's a great product. And they have upped the ante a little bit. They've added ETH prizes to the top of the pool, so you can not only win cards in the limited contest, you can also win ETH. Pretty exciting there. Didn't have that for NBA, so I'm excited to see that. We will talk about SoRare a little bit more later on. This show is also, we do have a 2-game slate coming up in an hour, so we will just very briefly touch on that before we jump into a deep dive of the night slate. So just as an overview of this 2-game slate, we've got Zach Wheeler on the mound, Lance Lynn, Hunter Gaddis, and Matt Boyd are our 4 pitchers. Wheeler being the top projected pitcher, also the highest priced pitcher. Lance Lynn, number 2 on the board in projection. Then it drops off a little bit down to the Cleveland-Detroit game. Gaddis and Boyd don't project nearly as well as the top pitchers. Adam, as we're talking about a 2-game slate, first of all, let's talk a little strategy. So, like, first of all, are you willing to, or just tell me what you do differently on a 2-game slate versus like a 7-game slate?
I don't play them. That is what I do differently. But no, I mean, for me in MLB, typically I don't play unless it's like at least 3 or 4 games. But if I do, I mean, obviously the one big difference is that you're going to be more willing to take hitters against your pitcher. You don't really have too much of a way around it, and it helps you to be more contrarian, more unique, in your roster construction, which obviously can be tough on 2-gamers. But yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing, is just being willing to take hitters here and there against your pitcher.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing I do too. And also it is the one thing if you are using Fantasy Cruncher, and I guess you don't play the 2-game slate, so maybe you don't do this, but it is the one spot where I will actually adjust my projections, which is partly because of my process is also pretty different from yours, I think, Adam. But for the way I play, I am more willing to catchers who project. Sometimes you'll find a catcher who projects far worse than the other 3 catchers, but it's like, well, they could all put up 0s and this catcher could put up 3. So I'm a little bit more willing to adjust projections to get more of players that I wouldn't otherwise get who are underowned. That kind of thing. I do a little bit differently on 2-game slates. I also might not stack as much. Typically, I think that I'm more willing to play like, a 3 or 4-man primary stack, or like maybe I'll do like a 3-3 stack, something like that with one-offs. I don't know. It's a little bit, I mess around a little bit more with my stack types. I'm less likely to full stack on a 2-game slate, particularly if it's good pitchers, and I don't think that any of the teams on the slate, any of the lineups are likely to have 5 good batters. I'm a little bit more willing to do shorter stacks. But we're not going to do a deep dive on this. Do you even know who's playing? We didn't really prepare for the early slate as much. I only asked because this was billed as live before lock, I believe. So we want to at least touch on the early game for people who are playing it. Do you have any thoughts on the early slate?
Much better pitching in the second game with Wheeler versus Lynn than the first game with Gaddis versus Boyd. It is a good matchup for Gaddis. He's reasonably priced if you want to get there. Tougher matchup for Boyd. But clearly Wheeler and Lynn are the 2 top pitchers that you're going to get to. That also, most likely, we don't have ownership or anything posted, but that probably means you're going to get the most. My guess would be you're getting the most ownership coming into Cleveland than probably either Detroit or Philly, then the other one of Philly, Detroit, and then the White Sox would be my guess. So again, also on 2-game slates, you're going to end up just having to be more comfortable going after the best pitchers on the slate, just because there's not really a mid-range of, teams in good spots, but not super popular. Like, you're just going to have so much ownership, most likely flocking to the best matchups there, that you're going to be more interested in taking bats against somebody like Wheeler than you ever would be on normal size slates.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that's a good enough breakdown of this slate, in my opinion. If any of you have specific questions about the early slate, you can feel free to ask them. But I think we're going to jump into the main slate. I think most people are going to be here for the main 11 game slate starting at 7:05 Eastern tonight. So we'll talk more about that one. But first, Adam, tell me your thoughts on this Draymond Domantas Sabonis situation. Do you have any strong take on, what was Draymond trying to stomp him? What was going on there?
I don't have a strong take on it at all. My only strong take is that, and this happens so much, and it's an example of it yesterday, using slow motion replay to try and determine the intent of what somebody did in real time is absurd. Like, people are, I saw it, I think it was from Wob, like late last night, just put out like the video from, I think it was the Kings broadcast, like the baseline angle where it looks worse than any of the other ones. And it's like, oh, well, yeah, if you slow down this one, you can see that clearly he like stomps his foot down. It's like, yeah, but you still have to remember that in real time, he was having his ankle grabbed, getting tripped up and trying not to fall down. Like that's all it is. And then like you see people on Twitter, like, oh, well, then he like jumps off of him. And it's like, yeah, if you've ever been tripped, that's exactly what you do to keep your balance. So like, that's my only take. If it were a non-Draymond Green player, I'd be pretty confident saying it was an accident. With it being Draymond, I have no idea if it was intentional. My only strong take is that slowing down replays so that you can look at it and say like, oh yeah, see right here is where he decides to just jam his foot down is absurd when all this is happening in like, split seconds.
Yeah, I think that I have the exact same take. Like the first time I watched it, I was like, no, he had his feet grabbed. Like that was he was just like falling. That was where his foot landed. And then of course the slow-mos make it look a lot worse. I don't have any strong opinion on whether it was intentional at all. Maybe he was a little bit flustered by the fact that Domantas Sabonis is grabbing his leg for some reason and does come on a little bit harder than he normally would. But it is hard to get in somebody's head. But because it is Draymond, it is a little harder to really write off that he did it intentionally.
Right. And that's the thing too. It's like, it's almost like people are acting like it was some premeditated thing. At worst, this was, he got his ankle grabbed and just instinctually like stomped down on him.
Right.
Like if it was intentional, it's that kind of intentional, not like Draymond's running around all game just waiting for Sabonis to try and trip him so he can stomp on him.
Yeah, exactly. And he didn't even have time to know who was grabbing his ankle necessarily. I don't know. I don't think it was like I'm going to take out Domantas Sabonis kind of play.
Right. Yeah. At worst, it was, this dude's on my ankle and I'm going to kick him to get him off of my ankle.
Right, which is probably reasonable.
Right.
All right. Well, we will jump into the main slate. Do you have any overarching thoughts? We have an 11 game slate here to talk about, so we'll go game by game. But do you have any overarching thoughts that you want to start with?
Weather looks good today, so we don't have to worry about rain, or shouldn't have to worry about rain. There's some solid pitching. There's a lot of not solid pitching. There's a Coors game. One thing that did really stand out to me when I started registering last night, put together my dummy lineup. Typically, if I have the time, I try and just go through by hand and put together what I think like a cash lineup might look like, just to see how close I can get. And on DraftKings, you can play the two best pitchers with a full Coors game stack. So in tournaments, I fully expect that you're getting a wild amount of ownership coming into Pittsburgh and Colorado, which I think you and I had talked about it before. I always find it kind of interesting. Like, on the one hand, it's frustrating that they don't just price these teams better so that you have to, make decisions. But on the other hand, over the course of a season, if you're just going to give me 40% hitter ownership from two teams on an 11 game slate, you're going to have a lot of slates where you just get cleaned out because Coors goes off. But it does set up to, it is nice when you just funnel nearly half the field to one game.
Right. It's a lot easier to get different when half the field is playing one game, especially when it is, as you mentioned yesterday, Colorado and Pittsburgh. It's not it's not the Yankees in Coors, it's Colorado and Pittsburgh.
Right. So I hadn't looked at the ownership yet, but 25% coming into Pittsburgh, 15% to Colorado. So 40% ownership going to that game. There's not a single team that is double digit owned other than those two.
Yep. Okay. With that, we will start jumping into the slate. First game on the slate is Washington at your Orioles. We have Josiah Gray on the mound for the Nats. We have Dean Kramer on the mound for the Orioles. Tell me about your level of interest in these pitchers.
Not too much in the pitchers. Dean Kramer has struggled so far this year. He was solid for Baltimore last year. Still an unproven pitcher overall, and just not somebody I think you really need to get to on this slate. He does have a decent matchup against the Nats, only a 3.9 implied run total. He's 6,200. From a value standpoint, I think you can make a case for getting to him. We do have him with a 15% chance of being a top 2 value pitcher on DraftKings, only 4% ownership. But it just goes back to, what we've talked about a lot with especially when hitter pricing isn't sharp, value SP2s just lose a lot of value because like getting 3x from a pitcher is still unlikely to be like the best value on the slate because you're just going to have hitters that go for 7, 8x. And that's where your value is going to come from. So it's one thing if like, if everybody in Coors were 6K, then you'd be making pretty strong arguments for taking chances on Dean Kramer. But when you can roster the highest projected hitters with Clayton Kershaw and Spencer Strider, you're really, really working uphill if you're trying to play Dean Kramer instead of, a top end pitcher.
Yeah, good call. And then the bats on the other side of it, Orioles, Nationals, what's your level of interest in the bats?
Very interested in the Orioles in particular. Josiah Gray has good stuff, good strikeout stuff, but he does give up power as well. And we know Baltimore has a lot of it, particularly from the left side. Since the start of last year, 263 expected ISO allowed from Josiah Gray. You have a Baltimore lineup that's going to have Mullins, Rutschman, Santander, Frazier, Henderson, all from the left side. Terran Vavro could certainly be in there as well. And then, of course, you can still play Mountcastle and Hayes and Mateo. Like they all have a lot of upside too, but you're going to get a predominantly left-handed lineup that has a lot of power going up against a pitcher that does a really, really poor job of limiting left-handed power. So Baltimore looks really good. And again, this is just a spot where on a non-Coors slate or a slate where Coors had like actual pricing on their hitters, Baltimore would be pretty popular, but here only a 6%, only 6% ownership, about a 5% chance of being the top stack. So I like getting there at pretty low ownership.
Okay. And then can you rank the four sides of this game?
Baltimore bats, Kramer, Nats bats, Gray.
Okay. We'll move right along to Yankees at Angels. Clark Schmidt on the mound for the Yankees. We got Jose Suarez for the Angels. What's your level of interest in these pitchers?
Not much. Again, just the same thing. Like I don't think you need to pay down the Clark Schmidt here. There are some strikeouts in the Angels lineup. He is only 6,300, but it's just not a spot you're going to need to get to very often. That's reflected in the top pitchers tool as well. He's pulling 5% ownership, very similar to Dean Kramer. Slightly more ownership, slightly higher chance of being a top 2 value, but same kind of thing. If you had better hitter pricing or sharper hitter pricing, you would make a stronger case for Schmidt, just like you would Kramer. But here, it's just not going to be something you need to get to all that often. Jose Suarez is a decent pitcher, but not a guy I'm really looking to target against the Yankees. Since the start of last year, does have a 22.5% strikeout percentage against righties. 164 expected ISO isn't terrible. Again, he's a solid enough pitcher, but I just don't really see a compelling reason to be looking to get to him on this particular slate.
Yeah, we've got kind of a large slate to be targeting mediocre pitchers against the Yankees. Sir Mannion says, because of what was just said, I am going to put plenty of Baltimore bats at work tonight. Yeah, they're looking pretty good here. How about the bats in the Yankees Angels game? What's your level of interest?
Definitely interested in the bats. Suarez not bad, like I just said, but Yankees, of course, very, very good. And when you're going to get 40% of the field going to Coors, if you're not going to Coors, you should typically just be taking like the highest upside bats you can find because nobody else is getting that much ownership. Yankees are 5th in top stack percentage at about 5%, 6% ownership. So they look pretty similar to Baltimore in that regard. But it's just take advantage of being able to get, low owned Aaron Judge, Gleyber Torres, against lefties. Not having Stanton here hurts, but you still have those two. You have Volpe probably leading off at a cheap price tag. That's going to be a good value option. So it is a little bit of a watered down Yankees lineup. Like you do notice it with Stanton missing. There's just a huge piece there that you would really like to have, but the top of the order in particular is still going to look good.
Yep. And then how would you rank the four sides of the Yankees Angels game?
Yankees bats, Angels bats, Schmidt, Suarez.
Okay, guys, I forgot to say it again when you're coming in. I don't know what's I keep missing this. I gotta move around my notes, I guess. Give us a like if you have not yet liked the video. Please do. We really do appreciate it. It is as Lofty says, how we keep the lights on around here. Please give us a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Hit that notification button so we can get alerts when our shows go live. We appreciate it. All right.
I just wanted to add on real quick because I didn't specifically talk about the Angels, but Schmidt is still pretty much an unknown as a starter. He'd worked out of the bullpen previously. In the very limited sample so far this year, he has had major issues with power. 214 expected ISO to lefties, 372 to righties, only 75 total pitches to righties. So I don't think you should read into the specific numbers, but the fact that he has struggled a bit does stand out. And even since last year, including that time in the bullpen, 180 expected ISO to lefties. So you do have Shohei Ohtani here with the short porch and right. He always looks good. That goes without saying, but certainly looks good here. I don't mind Jake Lamb as a cheap power option either. Then you have a bunch of right-handed power, Ward, Trout, Renfroe, Drury, Rendon. Doesn't play up as much in Yankee Stadium, but you certainly can still go to those guys.
And did you already rank this game?
Yeah, Yankees, Angels, Schmidt, Suarez.
Okay. All right, then we will move on to the third game of the slate, which is Boston at Minnesota. We got Chris Sale on the mound for the Red Sox, Sonny Gray for my Twins. What's your level of interest in these pitchers?
This one's tough. Two pitchers that, Sonny Gray is good. Chris Sale, I don't know. Chris Sale, obviously, for a long time was very good. I do not know if he still is, but not a great matchup for Gray going up against Boston. Not a great matchup for Sale either. Sale's actually projected for 18% ownership, and I think that does make some sense. The thing with Sale is just he's giving up power. He's having a difficult time commanding within the strike zone, and so you're just getting a lot of hard hit balls against him. So far, a 199 expected ISO from lefties, 202 from righties. Obviously, the sample size is much smaller for lefties, but he's still striking guys out. And at 7,500, that does help to mitigate some of the risk there. So we've said it a lot with these cheap pitchers. You have to. It's tough to get to cheap pitching today if they don't have the ability to put up a raw score that's comparable to the top end pitchers. Sale at least does have that ability, that upside. Now, is he likely to do it? Probably not. They're not based on what we've seen so far, at least his inability to limit power, but he does at least have the strikeout stuff to go out there and put up a really big game. Whereas, guys we talked about like Dean Kramer, Josiah Gray, even though he does have decent strikeout stuff, they're not the same as what a good Chris Sale game looks like. So at 7,500, I do still think he's a solid play. 18% ownership is very reasonable. If we didn't have any concerns about Chris Sale and he was 7,500, the guy would be 60% owned. So I'm not overly concerned about the ownership there. You're not going to need to get to him all that often because it's still just so easy to get to the other, pay up options. But I do think at that price, I'm still willing to take chances on him just because of the strikeout ability. You're just hoping he manages to, not give up 6 home runs.
And then, with the volatility in Gray, then do you have interest in Twins bats? Tell me about your level of interest in the bats in this game.
Yeah, I do have interest in Twins bats just because we don't know what we're getting from Chris Sale, and he's given up a lot of power. Buxton, Correa in particular look really good. Ryan Jeffers is a strong value at catcher. Obviously, relatively difficult position to fill out. I think I'm more interested in them as mini stacks probably, but Minnesota I think does have a lot of upside here. You also get the green monster, so very short wall in left field if you can hit it high enough. So I do like getting to, especially the right-handed power bats in the Minnesota lineup.
And how about the Sox?
Not as interested in getting to the Sox. Kind of surprised that they have a 4.5 implied run total. Sonny Gray is a pitcher that I've been a big fan of for a very long time. Since the start of last year, 24.5% strikeout percentage, 0.7 home runs per 9, 3.72 xFIP. Just pretty good at limiting power and pretty good at getting strikeouts. 124 expected ISO to righties, 132 to lefties since last year. He has gotten touched up a bit by lefties so far this year with a 204 expected ISO, but that's less than 100 total pitches thrown. So no real reason to actually care about that yet. I think Gray is just a good pitcher that I'm not super interested in targeting against. I am surprised, like I said, at the 4.5 implied run total. Sometimes that, there's a reason for it. So
right.
I wouldn't write off Boston, but I have a more difficult time, I guess, saying why I'd be interested in Boston than I do a team like Minnesota.
Did you and Josh at one point have a bet on Sonny Gray, like what his price tag will get to on DraftKings or something?
It wasn't me and Josh. I don't remember who. I think it was with a guy that I know that plays DFS.
Okay.
But yeah, it was a few years ago. The bet was that Sonny Gray would be over $10,000 at some point in the season, and I think I won, but I don't.
I think you did too, but I don't remember either. Josh Gillum says Sale has a 406 BABIP with a 30% K rate, due for a little positive regression. It seems that way. It seems like
So the kind of, if you look at Sale's like ISO and expected ISO and WOBA and expected WOBA this year, he is due for regression. His actual ISO allowed to righties is 306. His expected ISO is 236. His actual WOBA allowed to righties is 437. His expected WOBA is 392. Similar stuff to lefties. So it's a situation where, like, yeah, he has been getting unlucky. He's also been pitching like shit. So, like, even if you strip out the luck, he's been bad, but not as bad.
Okay. And then how would you rank the four sides of this one?
Sale, Twins, Gray, Red Sox.
Okay. Well, we'll move on. Sale, Twins, Gray, Red Sox. Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah.
It just strikes me as one of those spots where, not that it's always going to happen, but there's a very good chance that either $7,500 Chris Sale is a winning play, or at least some parts of the Minnesota lineup are a winning play. Like, it's difficult for Sale to be that cheap with that type of strikeout stuff and not be a good play unless multiple Twins have home runs, or a Twin has multiple home runs.
Okay. Yeah. Paul Me says, Neil, you have all the home teams backwards. Yeah, you're right. I'm not. I've just been reading it in order of what I see in Fantasy Crunch. I should probably find a new method of how I do these teams in order. But I haven't been trying to do home and away, but I probably should do that in order of which team is home and which is away. There's probably a better way to do this. But we'll move on. We will talk about Texas at Kansas City. First, let me tell you about SoRare MLB. It's a great product. You know, I'm enthusiastic about it. If you've watched any of my shows, I do SoRare content pretty frequently throughout the week. It's been NBA so far, but now we have SoRare MLB available now. It's a little bit different than NBA in that it's not flex. There are actually positions in SoRare MLB, but it's the same concept where you are buying cards, and once you've bought a card, you can use it for forever, for the rest of a player's career. You'll be able to enter that card into some contests. It's a really fun play style, and every contest is single entry. So, you know, if you don't like competing against people who are playing 150 lineups, this is the perfect way to do that. You just have to buy 5 cards, or actually it's more than 5 for baseball, 7 or 8 cards to enter into these MLB contests on SoRare, and you can win real money prizes in the form of ETH, not US dollars, but ETH converts very easily to US dollars. I actually find it a little bit easier to work with ETH. So they've added ETH prizes into the SoRare MLB prize pool, along with very valuable cards that you can win at the various levels. I really like playing the limited contests on SoRare. The cost is not high to get into those contests. But if you are new to SoRare, if you're just signing up, you can use the link in the description of this video to access our offer, which is you buy 5 cards on the marketplace, you get a 6th limited card for free. So that's a card numbered to 5,000 that you will get for free for entering for buying 5 cards on the marketplace. And that 6th card that you get for free is going to be randomly selected. So it could be a superstar, not necessarily going to be a superstar. You don't really know what you're going to get, but kind of exciting to potentially get, you know, a Mike Trout, Ronald Acuna, somebody like that for your free card after you buy 5 on the marketplace. Just use the link in the description to take advantage of that offer. It really is a fun way to play, a little bit different than DFS. Highly recommend it. These cards can also be collectibles. You know, if you don't want to use them in contests, I've bought a few cards in NBA as collectibles as well. Really cool product. Adam, we'll move on. Texas at Kansas City. We've got Nathan Eovaldi on the mound for Texas, Brad Keller for the Royals. What's your level of interest in these pitchers?
I have some interest in Eovaldi. Good pitcher's park, good enough pitcher, reasonable price tag at $7,800. He's another guy that I don't think you're going to need to get to all that much, but we do have him with a 10% chance of being a top 2 pitcher, 9% projected ownership. Decent matchup against KC. I do like the top of the Kansas City order in general. You know, don't love taking pitchers against Witt, Melendez, Pasquantino, Perez. Those guys can all cause problems, but the bottom of the order is, you know, a bit weaker. So if you need somebody in that price range, you know, and you don't want to go to Sale, Eovaldi is certainly fine. Not enough strikeouts from Brad Keller for me to want to get there.
Okay. And then how about the bats?
Texas looks better than KC, I think. Semien at the top is relatively expensive, but, you know, still a high upside second base option. Since the start of last year, 142 expected ISO to righties for Keller, 156 to lefties. So he doesn't strike out a lot of guys, but he is pretty good at limiting power. Semien, Nathaniel Lowe give you very high ceilings. Adolis Garcia, Josh Young, Jonah Heim. Those 5 are all pretty appealing options, not top priorities. There's already been teams we talked about that I like more. Baltimore, for example, the Yankees, but those guys are all fine. You know, it does hurt that Seager's not in this lineup. On the other side, I'm always willing to get to Witt, Melendez, Pasquantino, Perez. One thing that I do always like about KC is that you have a high upside catcher. You know, that's a tough position to find good hitters. You get Salvador Perez there. Same can be said for shortstop. You get Bobby Witt there. If you don't want to go Perez at catcher, you get Melendez at catcher as well. So there's just a lot of upside at weak positions from Kansas City. Evaldi is a pretty good pitcher, and this is not a park I love taking hitters, but he does have some power issues. 200 expected ISO to lefties since last year, 163 to righties. You can get to him a bit, and then you also do get some speed from somebody like Bobby Witt. So neither stack is my favorite, but I do think you can at least point out individual hitters that look pretty good.
3-run shot calling a Vinny Pasquantino dong. Do you like it?
Yeah, I like it.
Like, good call there. All right. Can you rank the 4 sides of the game?
This one's actually difficult for me. Keller's last. Evaldi, Texas, KC, Keller, I guess.
Okay. Evaldi number 1. All right, we will move on. Arizona Diamondbacks at St. Louis Cardinals. We have Dre Jameson on the mound for the D-backs, Jordan Montgomery for the Cardinals. Adam, start with the pitchers. What's your level of interest in Jordan Montgomery and Dre Jameson?
So I'm interested in Montgomery, good pitcher, but pulling 9% ownership here, 15%, 14.5% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. So he is going a little bit under-owned. The problem is that some, like the DraftKings pricing algorithm on him, sort of just like figured out what his price should be and then made him $1,000 more expensive while it left everybody else at normal prices. When you have Clayton Kershaw for 10-1 or Spencer Strider for 10-4, it becomes tough to want to pay $9,500 for Montgomery. He's $1,100 more than Snell. He's more expensive than Stroman against Oakland. So that's why you're seeing the low ownership. But if you look at the top pitchers tool, if you look at the top 7 pitchers in top 2 percentage, so that would be Strider, Kershaw, Gilbert, Stroman, Snell, Montgomery, Sale. Montgomery's the only one pulling single-digit ownership. Clayton Kershaw's at 14%. Sales at 18. Everybody else is north of 20, except for Montgomery, just sitting here at 8 to 9%. So in tournaments, we do have we have soft hitter pricing. So you can conceivably find that extra money, sort of overpay to be contrarian on Montgomery. He's not a great strikeout pitcher, but good enough strikeout stuff. Pretty good at limiting power. Since the start of last year, 148 expected ISO to righties, sub 100 to lefties, and yeah, just a good pitcher overall, doesn't walk guys. So in tournaments, I think he's interesting. I don't think he's somebody that you'd be considering in cash games or that you're really going to get to outside of for ownership reasons. I don't have any interest in going to Jameson against the Cards.
Okay, we got a question that I want to ask you. You might have an opinion on this. Paul me asks, what are the best advanced metrics to attack against pitchers in order? Hard hit rate, exit velocity, fly ball percentage, or what do you keep? So I use stochastic projections. So these are all things that would go into the projections that are already done for me. So I don't have a great answer. Do you have anything better?
Yeah, I mean, I use projections, and again, it's we talk about it a lot. If you're using good projections, you don't want to be doubling up and saying like, oh, well, this hitter projects well against this pitcher, and he has, the pitcher gives up a lot of hard contact, because like that's a big reason that the batter's projecting well. But when I'm trying to like do a show and contextualize to somebody like why a hitter would project well, typically I'm looking at the expected ISO, expected WOBA pitchers allow. That's going to not directly include hard hit rate, but if you're giving up like a high expected ISO, you're getting hit hard. So yeah, it's more, I think that's kind of the thing to keep in mind though, is when we're talking on these shows, it's contextualized. It's trying to explain why someone projects well from an actual roster building standpoint. I'm not like using the projections and then also using stuff that goes into the projections.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the hardest thing in doing content like this, because like my best season ever for MLB, I probably spent 20 minutes per day working on my MLB lineup. So I look at the top pitchers tool, the top stacks tool, all of this stuff is incorporated. And then people want to talk about the individual stats that go into the projections. And I'm like, well, I've never had to do that because I just use stochastic stuff, which tells me, it contextualizes everything. It factors in all of the little, XFIP, WOBA, all these stats that people want to talk about. But it's like, well, if you just use the actual, like the tools that we have, they're already factoring that kind of stuff in. So it's a little bit, it's boring to just give numbers. And I understand that. So we try to contextualize it. But then I always do worry about like, well, if we get too much into this data, then people are gonna be like, he already projects well. And also he's facing a left-handed pitcher who gives up a lot of home runs, and like, they're going to double count. So I'm always wary about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I kind of joke that with MLB in particular, because like MLB is the sport that I know the most about. It's the sport that I enjoy researching the most. Like I used to do shows where, I would have spent the entire day on Baseball Savant or Brooks Baseball, like really digging into stuff. And I think you can make a case with pitching that stuff like that's still useful because pitchers do change pitches. They make adjustments. And you can sometimes, there'll be a few times a year where you can actually pick up like, well, this pitcher doesn't project that well because he hasn't been good for, the last 3 years, but now he has a new pitch that is getting a bunch of swinging strikes and he's different. You can usually, you'll find a few of those a year, but I used to like those shows. I feel like were definitely more entertaining because I had a bunch of really interesting stuff to say. But at the end of the day, from a DFS actionable standpoint, it still just boils down to like mostly, just play, use projections, use ownership, and like play good lineups. But yeah, that is one thing that I do think is interesting with baseball is like basketball. The data is not available anyway, but it's not like you're going to find multiple instances throughout a season where like some dude that's terrible at shooting suddenly figures out how to shoot.
Right.
You'll get pitchers that it's like, oh, well, this guy's always been bad at getting strikeouts, but now he has, sweepers, the new pitch that everybody's throwing. It's like, oh, well, now he has this pitch that he throws and it moves 6 feet and nobody can hit it. So like that does get interesting with baseball, but other than that.
Yeah, I'm sure there are instances like throughout the year where it does, like you can find little stats in there that are relevant. I just like, for me, it's like the amount of time that it would take to
Right.
find all those little tidbits is like, I don't think it's necessary for most of us, but I'm sure you could add a little bit of EV at least by digging into that kind of stuff if you really wanted to. I just not something that I think is typically going to be worth your time because most 99.8% of stuff is already factored into projections, and it's hard to like know when you are double counting, like whether you should be factoring in, which I understand that's Paul Mee's question. That's why he's asking, what are the most relevant things to look at, because he doesn't want to be looking at irrelevant stats.
Right.
It wasn't a bad question.
Yeah, and so the like two things to what you said. One, as far as the time commitment goes, in most cases, even if you find something where it's just like, oh, this hitter is, has a better launch angle than he ever has, or this pitcher's throwing some new pitch or whatever it may be, realistically, you're talking about adding like, a fraction of a point to a projection or, maybe like a point. So it's not like it's changing things that drastically anyway, which goes to the double counting point and also the amount of time that you're spending to basically have the same projection. But then also like there's I said there's going to be like a few times a year where you can find a pitcher that is different and it contributes to long-term results. There's a bunch of times where you can find a pitcher where it's like, oh, this guy might be different. And then it ends up that he's just the same guy. And so it's like, not only are you spending all that time to maybe get like a point difference in your projection, but you're also going to be wrong so many times because some shitty pitcher looked good for 2 starts and then went back to being really bad. Yeah.
And so for me, I think MLB is the sport that I want to look at that kind of stuff. Like NBA, you can find like minutes projections. You can find like, oh, I think that this player is going to pick up an extra 3 minutes in this game, and that's like a huge thing in NBA. Like contextualizing other sports, I feel like is easier and also like way more important than MLB, where it's like you might be able to find a fractional edge that you don't necessarily need, and you could be doing yourself a disservice. So it's tougher for me, but yeah, like NBA,
that's a good point. Like for NBA, it's so much easier to just be like to know if the field is projecting somebody too low. Like Josh and I have talked about it because like we'll talk about like pick and roll data sometimes. That's like the NBA equivalent of like diving into Baseball Savant. And it's like, yeah, it's interesting to talk about, but really it's just more of like, and I think Paul said in the chat, like as a tiebreaker, if I can't decide between Trae Young and Damian Lillard, and Trae Young's playing a team that can't defend the pick and roll, like, yeah, I'll use that as a tiebreaker, but the projection's still the projection. And even if you're not adding that much to it, but you can get those situations where it's like, wait, everybody's projecting this guy to play 26 minutes. I'm pretty sure that his team would like him to play 30. Like that's a spot where you're just saying like, oh, this guy's projection is 4 points too low.
Right. And that's a huge difference.
Doesn't exist in baseball. Like, yeah, they're all hitting, X amount of times.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, interesting discussion, which leads us to the bats in this game, Arizona and St. Louis. What's your level of interest here?
Interested in the St. Louis side. Dre Jameson is young, unproven, 151 expected ISO to righties since last year, 187 to lefties. Very limited sample there. The Cardinals, we know, just have a lot of good bats. Nolan Gorman is probably your best bet from the left side, but Goldschmidt, Arenado, Contreras, we know those guys are all really good as well. Jordan Walker's got big time power, one of the top hitting prospects in baseball. The Cardinals are just another one of those teams where from a projection standpoint, they don't compare to Coors because nothing is going to, especially when you consider the pricing on Coors, but they do at least have a bunch of power in their lineup that can do damage. They're getting 1% aggregate ownership, 3% chance of being the top stack. So middle of the pack in terms of top stack score. No ownership. I never mind getting to this team at low ownership. Arizona's a more difficult sell just because I do have just a lot of belief in Montgomery as a strong pitcher. Since the start of last year, like I said, striking out 33% of lefties with a sub 100 expected ISO, 148 expected ISO to righties, 19.9% strikeout percentage. That's because he relies so heavily on his sinker. That's a pitch that typically isn't going to generate a lot of swings and misses, but if you have a good one, it's just going to get pounded into the ground, and that's what you see from Montgomery. He is an example of a pitcher where, like, if he changed some things, he would be a really good strikeout pitcher. He has good breaking stuff. He has a good changeup. It's just a philosophy thing that they would rather him be efficient with his pitches, get ground balls. So it's not great for DFS, but he is still a tough, very tough pitcher to hit against.
Yep. And with that in mind, how would you rank the 4 sides of this game?
Montgomery, Cardinals, D-backs, Jameson, I guess.
Yeah. I feel like I missed an opportunity here with Paul Me set me up to talk about the tools. We're talking about how much success we've had using the tools and how my best season I didn't do any outside analysis, literally just use top stacks, top pitchers tool for everything. Well, you can get our tools for 50% off right now using promo code SCORE. This is for new users only, but if you are a new user, you can get 50% off any sport, platinum, weekly, or monthly. Click the link in the description of this video or use promo code SCORE. Get access to everything Stokastic has to offer, including ownership, lineup generator, lineup builder, boom bust, leverage scores, and our industry leading projections. This is a dynamic offer in that you can choose which package you want to do. You don't have to do MLB. You can do every sport at Stokastic, or if you want, you can do 50% off just the MLB only package. That'll be a lot cheaper. And again, these are the tools that we've had a lot of success with. These are, again, tools that sometimes they're the only thing I look at for an entire slate. I look at the weather. I guess I should say I do look at the weather as well, just to make sure there's no huge concerns. But outside of the weather, I just look at top stacks tool, top pitchers tool, and I've had a lot of success doing that. So I think you could too. Highly recommend taking advantage. Look at the top pitchers, top stacks tool, etc., etc. Promo code SCORE or use the link in the description of this video. Adam, next game, back to some of the best stacks on the slate. Independent of the pitching that they're going against Toronto and Houston. We've got Jose Urquidy on the mound for Houston, Chris Bassett for Toronto. Starting with pitchers, what's your level of interest?
Not too much here. Just so much respect for both offenses. Chris Bassett, not great strikeout stuff. Good pitcher overall. No real question about that. But 22% strikeout percentage since the start of last year. 3.89 xFIP, 1.1 home runs per 9. Just don't really see the need to try and pick on the Astros here. Bassett's pulling 1% ownership, 7% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. So if you want to argue he's going under-owned, fine. And, you can get to him here and there in large field tournaments, but there's nothing that stands out to me. Same goes for Urquidy at 8,100. I just don't really see getting to him against Toronto as a priority for me. He's a decent pitcher, but, Toronto clearly a lot of really good hitters, and there's just a lot of good pitching on the slate that I would get to first.
Adam, I see you already answered this question from Josh in chat, but I do think it is a good question. Asking, do y'all play 2 pitchers from the same game, or is losing out on an extra 4 points a big deal? Yeah, I'm with you. Like, I don't set any kind of rules to not allow it. I think if I were hand building, and like, it's definitely a tiebreaker for me when I am hand building. That's like, okay, I can't get wins from both these pitchers, so I wouldn't do it. Does it factor in for you at all? Like, do you ever consider? Okay.
No, I mean, it's one of those where, like, I guess, if you're hand building a lineup as a tiebreaker, if like you like 2 pitchers exactly the same and one is facing your other pitcher, I guess you would make a case to go with the other one. But yeah, it's not something that I care about particularly at all.
Yeah. It's something that I sometimes wonder if I should factor it in a little bit more than I do, but yeah, it's not something I've ever set a rule for. Like, 4 points is a big deal for a pitcher. But also, I don't know. Sometimes if the environment is right for pitchers, like if the stadium's right, the weather's right, things are working out for one pitcher, maybe it makes it a little bit more likely to work out for the other pitcher as well. So I kind of think that there are pros and cons.
Yeah, and it's also not like you get an automatic. It's not like one of the pitchers has to get a win. It's not MMA where somebody is winning. There's just so many games where you're going to get a no decision from one or both guys that taking so like, especially when you're talking, good pitchers. Like, let's say you have I don't know if we have a good example today of two good pitchers facing each other that you would really want to play, but let's just say Bassett and Urquidy were like two of the best projected pitchers on the slate. I don't want to just like set rules so I can't have two of the best pitchers together when there's such a high percentage of the time that neither guy is going to get a win, or so it's like, yeah, it's lowering your ceiling by 4 points, but like your absolute ceiling by 4 points, but it's still just not. I don't want to keep myself. So so Josh said Strider Snell, exactly.
Yep.
I don't want to just like have no Blake Snell because I'm jamming in Spencer Strider.
Yep, that makes sense to me. And yeah, I've never set that rule either, and I don't think I would. All right, how about the bats in the Toronto Houston game? Who do you like, if anybody?
I am interested in, both offenses just because they're so good, but particularly the Toronto side. You do have a pitcher in Urquidy that doesn't have great strikeout stuff and has had some power issues. 19.3% strikeout percentage against righties since the start of last year, 208 expected ISO. You have a lot of right-handed power in this Toronto lineup. You also have the Crawford boxes in left field. I mean, you have what is like 300 feet to left field in Houston for a bunch of right-handed bats that can hit the ball really far. I do think you have some sneaky home run upside for Toronto. Not opposed to getting the Houston bats either. They're still really, really good. But I do think that Bassett's a little bit better than Urquidy.
Okay. And with that in mind, how would you rank the four corners of this game?
Toronto 1, Houston 2, Bassett 3, Urquidy 4.
Makes sense. Move on. We can talk about the Coors game now. Pittsburgh at Colorado. We have Jose Urena on the mound for the Rockies, Vincent Velasquez for the Pirates. Starting with the pitchers. You playing either of these pitchers in this Coors game?
Absolutely not.
Okay, we can move on from there. How about the bats? Who do you like in this game?
All of them. This is really, really tricky. And this is one where, obviously I haven't built lineups yet, but I'm always really interested to see how it plays out for me in spots like this. And a lot of times what ends up happening is that Pittsburgh, Colorado will end up being my two highest owned teams, but I'll still end up being lower than the field on individual hitters. If you look at the individual hitting ownership coming into these two teams right now, you just have, double-digit ownership across the board. The entire Pirates team is at least 19% owned with the exception of Austin Hedges. The entire Rockies team is at least 12% owned with the exception of Jonathan Daza. So it's really, really difficult to build five-man stacks that are contrarian unless you kind of have to be willing to then go off the board at pitcher at that point. Otherwise, you're really just holding hands with everybody. So if you are full stacking the Pirates here, that's where somebody like a Chris Bassett or a Jordan Montgomery, like those guys start to make more sense because they are still good pitchers that just aren't getting any ownership. But another way I think you can approach it is using Pirates or Rocky sitters as filler, whether it's one-offs, three-mans, whatever. And in that case, like I've seen people make the argument, and I don't agree with it, but I've seen people make the argument that they don't like using one-offs or mini stacks from popular teams. And I think the logic there is that because of correlation, like if Brian Reynolds and Andrew McCutchen do well, it increases the likelihood of other guys on the Pirates doing well, which I get. But home runs also win you tournaments, and you can very, very frequently have a situation where the Pirates score 5 runs. Most of their iterations of the 5-man stack suck, but Brian Reynolds has 20-something DraftKings points, and so does Andrew McCutchen. So I actually don't have an issue with it at all. I think the counter argument to the correlation thing is that by going with a 2-man or a 3-man, you get a huge leg up on such a high percentage of the field when it plays out the way I just described, because so many people are going to have 5-man stacks of the Pirates. You're actually kind of contrarian by not having 5. So I don't buy into that like philosophy. And a lot of times what you'll end up seeing from me in my lineups on slates like this is I don't want to just forego the very obvious best hitters, best values, all of that. But if I stack, let's say, the Orioles or the Cardinals or something like that, there's no reason I can't use the Pirates or the Rockies to fill out my lineup.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. I've never really quite understood the argument of, I guess I get it to some extent. You don't want to play bats from the popular stack because they're going to be inflated because everybody wants to play the stack. But yeah, as you said, those individual bats can absolutely go off. So it's not something I've ever tried to avoid really either. The like using the Colorado as my 3-man or 2-man secondary stack, definitely not something I've ever done. I remember last year. Go ahead.
No, and it's still to be clear, like I'm not saying if you like 2-man or 3-man stack the Pirates, like you don't have to worry about ownership at all. Like you're still going to have, of the 5-man Cardinal stacks, a high percentage of them are going to be paired with the Pirates or the Rockies. So you're still more likely, if you're using the Pirates at all, you're more likely to be going to like some lower owned pitchers, regardless of what your primary stack is. But when you think about the total ownership of your lineup, obviously it's easier to get a relatively low number if you only have 2 or 3 of the Coors bats as opposed to 5.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just gonna say, I remember you and I having a conversation last year. You had brought it up on, I think, a couple streams that you were questioning whether we should be full stacking as much, because if the entire field is different, maybe you can get different by not full stacking. And my counterpoint at that time was, like, after giving it some thought, I was like, well, Nerdy Tenor, we talked about how he has machine learning as part of his process.
Yeah.
And I said, well, so maybe he's ahead of the curve. So I like to look at his stuff, and he's still full stacking at the time for the most part. And then you and I also had a conversation about how we don't know what machine learning is, but it seems really smart.
Yeah.
But I
also had Josh test that out for a month, and he just lost his ass.
That's also that was fun. So was that really the reason you brought it up, just to have Josh lose his ass for a month?
Yeah, I definitely wasn't wrong. I just wanted Josh to lose one.
Yeah. But also I was going to say, so I doing my solo shows early on, I looked at Nerdy Tenor a few times, and he was starting to stack in weird ways. Like he was still stacking, but he did a lot more like 3-2-2 stacks, and like starting to stack in more different ways. So I don't know.
And I mean, also that topic, like it was DraftKings specific too, because DraftKings home runs are weighted more. Like FanDuel, the correlation's stronger because RBIs and runs are weighted more. But DraftKings, like you're really looking for home runs. And I think that the correlation on DraftKings is more so if you have a guy from a team hitting a home run, there's just a better chance that the pitcher they're facing isn't pitching well. More so than the typical, you get a bunch of base hits and you score runs and get RBI. Like obviously that correlation still exists, but home runs are just so powerful on DraftKings. I think it's more so just like if you're facing a bad pitcher, your whole team's facing a bad pitcher kind of thing. Whereas FanDuel, it's still like you can put up very quickly very big scores just from singles, doubles, runs, and RBI.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So maybe makes more sense to full stack on FanDuel. So do you? I guess you're not really playing GPPs. You're playing cash these days, so you haven't really tested as much this year. But definitely something I've thought about trying out more. Maybe some of the small stacks on DraftKings, but probably not as interesting on FanDuel. You can also only stack up to 4 on FanDuel, so like you're already doing somewhat smaller stacks.
I double stack always on FanDuel. I don't on DraftKings.
Yeah, I also play the smaller slates where sometimes maybe I won't double stack as much, but it's still like I usually do like 3-3 or something. Zach asked, does min salary matter for the early 2-game slate? No, so I never put in any kind of salary restrictions in MLB at all. Do you?
Nope.
Yeah, so it's not a factor for me.
No, I mean, like typically, like I'm still going to get lineups that are close to 50K, but like you'll see, some where it's like 48.5, stuff like that, because of stacking. The one thing you just kind of want to pay attention to, and it can be difficult, is the only time I really care is like, let's say I stack some cheap team, like, I don't know. Let's say
Detroit.
I stack, Detroit's a good example. So like, let's say I stack Detroit and my lineup just ends up with like $48,500. I don't care as long as I have good one-offs, solid pitching, and the best pieces I can get from Detroit. Where I do care, and again, it's kind of hard if you're playing a lot of lineups to catch all the time, but I don't want to be spending 48.5 on the Detroit stack where I'm playing like Detroit's 9-hitter and some random not very good one-off somewhere where it's just like, oh well, I can just get a good hitter in this spot. That's the one spot where it gets tricky. Like I'll look at a lineup and be like, oh, this lineup's doing well, and then it's like, why do I have this random 7-hitter here instead of like Aaron Judge? That's where it gets tricky. But
but it's still an MLB. Even in that case, it's like, well, a random hitter can outscore Aaron Judge any given day. But
it's also not like knowing that you're still confined to 150 lineups at most. Like you want the Aaron Judge in that spot, but you're still. It's not like you're a massive dog or something. It's not like NBA where if you just randomly play Malik Monk over LeBron James, you're never winning. Like it's not like that in baseball.
Okay. And then I'm sure this will be a difficult one to rank here. Pittsburgh and Colorado, the 4 sides of the game. How do you rank
Pittsburgh bats, Colorado bats, don't touch the pitching. If you did, I guess Velasquez and then Urania.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we'd kind of alluded to it, but the pricing's just broken. $3,800 Key Brian Hayes, $3,400 Carlos Santana, $2,700 Jack Sawinski, $3,200 for Adolfo Castro. On the other side, $5,500 for Chris Bryant is fine. $5,400 for CJ Cron is fine, but a $3,600 leadoff hitter in Jurickson Profar, $4,100 Blackman, $4,500 McMahon. You have a $3,700 catcher in Diaz. The whole game is cheap. I said it. The dummy lineup I just put together by hand on DraftKings had Strider, Kershaw, 4 Pirates, 4 Rockies, and there were multiple ways you could do that.
So today you're probably stacking in cash games.
Yeah, without trying.
Yeah. Man, I did not realize how low the prices were. That is insane.
Yeah.
For a Coors game. Okay. Moving on, we've got the Cubs at the A's. We have Ken Waldachek on the mound for the A's, Marcus Stroman for the Cubs. Starting with the pitchers, what is your level of interest?
I'm interested in Stroman. It's a good pitcher's park. Stroman's a good real-life pitcher, not the best strikeout pitcher. He is somebody that I'm pretty sure has added that sweeper, so maybe you see strikeouts come up for him. So far this year, limited sample, but 30% strikeout percentage against righties, 26% against lefties. You compare that to last year, it was 18.7% to righties, 23 to lefties. So this is an example of somebody where there is some chance that Marcus Stroman is a better strikeout pitcher now than he has been in the past. He's always been a very good real life pitcher. He's always been somebody where it's if he wanted to, he could get more strikeouts. But similar to Jordan Montgomery, he just throws sinkers and gets ground balls. So maybe things have changed. Maybe he is going to maintain the strikeout rate. But even if he doesn't, even if you just assume Marcus Stroman is Marcus Stroman, he's 8,800. He's facing the A's in Oakland. He looks like a good pitching option. He's pulling 24% ownership right now, 16% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. So like him either way, like him even more if what he's done so far this year is real.
And no Ken Waldachuk for you?
No Ken Waldachuk.
Okay. How about the bats then? Are you playing any?
Ken Waldachuk's pulling 10% ownership. That's surprising. I think he's just another Dean Kramer type guy where I don't really need him on this slate, but if you do need to pay down, it's fine. He's unproven, but he is a relatively highly regarded pitching prospect. He was a big piece of whatever trade the Yankees made with Oakland. I don't remember. Oh, Frankie Montas. Okay. Yeah, Frankie Montas. Yeah, I mean, since last year, 218 expected ISO to righties, 214 to lefties, 20% strikeout percentage across the board. Certainly hasn't shown up in the majors yet, but the underlying talent's there. It just doesn't strike me as a slate that I need to get to him.
Yeah, according to the top pitchers tool, Ken Waldachuk is Dean Kramer, except at more than double the ownership. So hard to get too excited about playing him. Similar pitcher at double the ownership. And then the bats in this game. Are you playing any Cubs against Ken Waldachuk? Are you playing any A's?
Not interested in the A's against Stroman. I am somewhat interested in the Cubs. They are basically middle of the pack in top stack percentage, 4.5%. There's just a bunch of teams in that range. Only pulling 2% ownership. The game being in Oakland does really suck, especially when you're comparing it to having a Coors Field game. But Waldachuk has given up power. Like I said, you have right-handed power on the Cubs. You also have speed. Horner at the top, Swanson. Those guys will run. You have Happ, Suzuki's back. You have Mancini from the right side. Wisdom's got big-time power. There is a lot of power upside from the Cubs. It's just that this park does so much to hurt that. That's why you only have a 4.6 implied run total for Chicago.
I was looking at Bros ChatGPT ballpark rankings since we're talking about the A's stadium and how tough it is. And I was like, I feel like I'm like, 90% right. Like my understanding of what are good and what are bad ballparks is 90% right, except for Texas is a pitcher's park according to ChatGPT. That they changed the dimensions.
That's the new. Right? It's a brand new stadium as of a few years ago.
Okay, and same thing with Baltimore. Obviously, used to be a huge hitter's park. Now it's a pitcher's park, which I kind of knew that one, and I kind of knew that Texas made some changes and it wasn't as hitter friendly as it used to be. But I did not realize it was now considered a pitcher, according to one ChatGPT article.
Well, yeah, because the thing with Texas is that the new park has a roof, and the old one didn't, so you don't have 105-degree outdoor games anymore. And the thing that also can get tricky with this conversation is a lot of parks, it's dependent on which side of the plate you're hitting from. Like my immediate response to Bro was that I thought Detroit was a hitter's park, and somebody posted the most recent park factors. And across the board, it's above average for righties, but it's below average for lefties by a bigger margin. Similarly with Baltimore, it used to just be great for everybody. Now they put basically a green monster 360 feet away in left field. So it's really, really, really hard for righties to hit home runs, but lefties have the exact same dimensions they always did. So like left-handed power isn't really affected by the ballpark change, whereas right-handed power is just destroyed.
Yep. I see Aha Bro in chat saying he's hoping that his posting that is sowing confusion around the industry. Yeah, I'm already confused. There's just like Wrigley. It's like depending on the weather, it can be a huge hitter's park or a huge. Yeah. How do you judge what Wrigley is? So yeah, definitely some nuance to the whether it's a hitter's or pitcher's park.
And then there's also nuance. Like a lot of times people talk about a park being a hitter's park and they're just talking home runs as opposed to runs scored.
Yeah.
Like you'll see some parks where that's different. Like Detroit, I already said the right lefty splits, but like it's very hard to hit home runs there. But there's huge gaps and some evidence that balls in general are hit harder in that park. So like it's still good for run scoring or can be good for run scoring, but home runs are down.
Yep. Did you rank the four sides of the Cubs-A's game?
Stroman, Cubs, Waldichuk, A's.
Okay. And then I think this is interesting. Atlanta at San Diego. We've got Blake Snell on the mound for San Diego, Spencer Strider for Atlanta. So two really good offenses, two really good pitchers. Starting with the pitchers, what is your level of interest?
Very high. Scary matchup for both guys, but they are just both good as well. 29% ownership coming into Snell at 8,400 on DraftKings, 32% coming into Strider. On FanDuel, 12% coming into Strider, 27.5% coming into Snell at just 7,400. FanDuel, I think you could probably make the case is a little bit more favorable for Snell also, just because you don't lose points when he walks people. The counter argument would be he's so inefficient with his pitches that you do need him to go 6 innings for the quality start on FanDuel. But at 7,400, kind of don't care. That's just a really, really, really cheap price tag for somebody that since the start of last year has a 31% strikeout percentage, 3.35 xFIP. Again, dangerous matchup against the Braves, but 57 degrees in San Diego. Both teams have implied run totals below 4. Happy to get the Snell at the reduced price tag. Braves are favored, 3.55 implied run total for San Diego. Strider is unbelievable in terms of strikeouts, 38.5% strikeout percentage since last year, 2.3 xFIP. And you saw I think it was his last start against Cincinnati when he was really, really popular at like 9,300. I know I've talked about it before, but the closest thing you're going to find to a floor for pitchers in DFS is strikeout ability. It's not facing bad lineups. It's not any of that, because you can still get unlucky on balls in play against bad lineups and give up runs that way. But if you can strike guys out, every strikeout is just erasing one of your earned runs. Whereas if you're not a very good strikeout guy and you're, a ground ball pitcher, but you just have 6 ground balls get through and suddenly you've given up 3 runs, it's really hard for you to make those points back in a hurry. Whereas Spencer Strider was pretty mediocre last start, still ended up having a solid outing. I think had like 20 DraftKings points or something, because he got hit relatively hard, he gave up runs, and then he just struck out everybody else and got the points back.
Yeah, I just realized I need to set lineups. I did enter this 2-game early slate. It looks like I have 7 minutes to make some lineups there, so I'm going to start doing that in a second. I went away from what I was doing, so let me get back to where I was. So yeah, pitchers obviously very interesting despite bad matchups. What about, are you playing bats against either of these pitchers?
Pretty difficult sell. If I went to one side, I would go to the Atlanta side. Snell just always gives you that blow up potential where it doesn't actually happen very often, but he flirts with it at least once a game. Like anybody that's rostered this guy in DFS knows that if you're watching the game, there's going to be like one inning in the first probably 4 where you just realize that your night is either about to end or that you're going to be fine, because he has the bases loaded and like 1 out or 2 outs and can't really throw strikes, but he does it once a game typically. So once in a while that does turn into, really big, a blow up and a good spot for the other team. The Braves clearly have the hitters that can do a lot of damage if Snell's working behind the counts. But at the same time, there's just a lot of teams in better spots that also aren't getting much ownership.
So not necessarily going there. Do you think you're going to be going to any San Diego bats?
No, San Diego's a more difficult one for me. Like they're second to last in top stack percentage, only ahead of Oakland. They obviously still have talent and they're not popular. So from that angle, you can always get there, but Strider is just less likely to be really bad than Snell is.
Yep. And then can you rank the 4 sides of this game?
Strider 1, Snell 2. On FanDuel, Snell 1, Strider 2, just because of price. But pitchers at the top: Braves 3, Padres 4.
Okay. Moving on, we have Milwaukee at Seattle. Logan Gilbert on the mound for Seattle. Colin Rea for the Brewers. What is your level of interest in these pitchers?
Gilbert looks pretty good. Actually projected to be the highest owned pitcher on DraftKings at 32.6%, just edging out Strider. 8,500 is a solid price tag for him. Good young pitcher. Since the start of last year, he's struck out 23% of hitters, 3.7 xFIP, less than 1 home run per 9 innings. Good park for pitching. Decent matchup against Milwaukee, 3.5 implied run total there. So just looks like a solid price tag on Gilbert. Probably going a little bit over owned, 16% chance of being a top 2 pitcher compared to the 32% ownership, but still a good play. I think that if you wanted to, this is a spot where, like, if you're playing Coors bats or you're playing other popular bats and you want to turn some Logan Gilbert into like an 8% owned Jordan Montgomery or a 9% owned Evaldi or an unowned Sonny Gray or Bassett, like that kind of makes sense there because the gap between them isn't that big. But if ownership's not a factor, Gilbert does project the best.
Okay. And then, sorry, did you go over the bats in this game yet?
No, I didn't. I don't love either side, but I do think the Mariners look better. 4.5 implied run total. Another park where hitting's not great. Colin Rea, we don't really know what to make of him. He came up with the Padres years ago. He's been back and forth to Japan. We don't have much relevant data recently. It's likely that he's not very good. Rodriguez, France, Suarez, Raleigh, Kelenic, like you have plenty of power in the Mariners lineup. But kind of like I've said about some other teams, I think the Mariners look fine. I just think that there's some other spots that are low enough owned that I like better, whether that's, the Orioles, the Yankees, the Twins, the Blue Jays, the Cubs. They all just kind of come in above Seattle.
Okay. And
Gilbert, Seattle, Brewers, Ray.
She's Squealed asking, how many MLB tourneys have I won? I don't know. I won several in 2021. I don't know if I actually won any last year. I got a couple top 3, but I don't know that I actually took any down. But yeah, 2021, I won several. And that's just using the tools. I actually took one down that I didn't use an optimizer, just literally hand built a FanDuel lineup. I was at a bar, wasn't 150 maxing, played like 1 or 2 large field GPP lineups, literally just using top stacks, top pitchers, and took down like 65,000 or something in that one. So definitely have had some success using these tools.
I had a 50. I apparently had a 50K win last year. I didn't even know that.
Did you really?
So I knew I had a 100K win last year. I was just looking. I happened to have like all of my tournament results in front of me because I was filling out those card things. Yeah, I remembered I had a 100K win last year. I totally forgot I had a 50K.
I've complained many times, and I don't want to get whiny about it, but I got 3rd last year in a tournament where I lost to 2 unstacked teams, and it was a 150 maxer who didn't really know how to play MLB yet. He was doing well at other sports, so decided, hey, I'm going to play MLB, and then just early in the season didn't stack at all, and he had two of his unstacked teams.
Told you, stacking's bad.
Stacking is bad. That is my takeaway as well. Stacking is bad. Yeah, so that was kind of brutal. All right, moving on.
Oh, I do remember the 50K win. Never mind. I remember now.
I remember your 100K win. Speaking of, you were talking the other day about how like some people run hot with like which tournaments they take down. Well, you won 100K in MLB. That was a brief thing last year. So
yeah, that one. Yeah.
When was the 50K?
It was early July. It was not very long before the ridiculous strip club experience prior to going to Chicago for the work meetup. So that explains why I was in a mood to spend a lot of money.
That's awesome.
Yeah, nice. I remember now.
Good for you. All right. Final game of the slate. We have the Mets at the Dodgers. Clayton Kershaw on the mound for the Dodgers. Tyler McGill for the Mets. Starting with the pitchers, what's your level of interest in Kershaw or McGill?
Definitely interested in Kershaw. Not a great matchup, but still a really good pitcher. Guy's getting old, but still really good. 27% strikeout percentage since last year, sub 5% walk percentage. Kind of surprised he's not pulling more ownership, just given how easy it is to get to him plus Strider. I get why there's an ownership gap between him and Strider, since Strider is a better strikeout pitcher at this point. But given how easy it is to just get them both together, I'm a little surprised you're not getting more ownership coming into Kershaw. And that's backed up by the top pitcher stool. 20% chance of being a top 2 pitcher, second highest on the slate. 14% ownership is like 5th, 6th highest. So I do like Kershaw quite a bit in tournaments, even though the matchup's not ideal. On the other side, I don't really see a reason to be paying $9,200 for Tyler McGill against a terrifying Dodgers offense.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think you need to go there. What about bets? How much interest do you have in the Mets or Dodgers?
Not really much in the Mets. Dodgers have the obligatory, they're not very popular, and they are the Dodgers. 2% projected ownership, 3% chance of being the top stack. Tyler McGill is a decent arm, but obviously when things go right for the Dodgers, they are incredibly good. 200 expected ISO to lefties since last year for McGill, 175 to righties, much lower 18% strikeout percentage against lefties than his 30% mark against righties. So it does, kind of stand out that like Freddie Freeman, Max Muncy, Outman are the guys that you're going to want to get to first, but clearly Mookie Betts, JD Martinez, Vargas, rounding out stacks are all good plays.
Yep. And then how would you rank the four sides of this one?
Kershaw 1, Dodgers bats 2, Mets bats 3, McGill 4, I guess.
Sotek says, I aspire to one day win 50K with lineup. I totally would have guessed that you had won at least 50K in some contest, Sotek. I know you went on some huge runs last year, winning multiple like showdown and different types of contests. So I'm surprised that you haven't. That's I would have guessed that you had, but I'm sure it will come soon enough. Adam, top 3 stacks. If you're doing a 3 entry, who would be your top 3 stacks today?
So I'll start with the caveat that if you can find a way to do it, obviously Pittsburgh and Colorado are 1 and 2.
Sure.
But outside of Coors, really like Baltimore. Yankees, really wish they were healthy, but Yankees. And then give me Toronto. I think there's, like I said before, I think there's just a lot of home run upside there.
And then top pitchers on this slate?
Strider, Kershaw, Snell, Stroman.
And do you want to do a dong pick?
Yeah, we can do that. I got mine right again yesterday.
Oh, did you? I didn't.
Yeah,
I forget who you picked.
Riley.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I
picked Paul Goldschmidt. He didn't play.
I'll take Rutschman.
All right. I will take. I think Judge is cheating, even though it's not Coors. I think anybody in Coors is cheating. How would Buxton in Fenway be cheating?
No, that's fine. He's facing a real pitcher.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Give me Buxton. I'll take Buxton here. All right. Any other final thoughts, Adam?
Nope.
All right, well, guys, we do have, I think, PGA Rainmaker show coming up. Let me double check this schedule. I believe that's coming up in 15 minutes. Eric and Greg will be going tip to tip on, the DraftKings Rainmakers PGA show. So check that out. 15 minutes from now on this channel should be a good time. I know that they've had some success with this Rainmakers PGA stuff. So check that out. Please do. If you haven't yet liked the video, please do like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, hit the notification button so you can get alerts when our shows go live. That'll do it for this show. Good luck, everybody.